The night was quiet on the outskirts of the city, the streets slick from a passing rain. Naomi Lewis pressed the off button on her car radio, letting the silence cradle her weary thoughts. She had just finished a 12-hour shift at St. Mary's Hospital. 12 hours of hurried steps, clipped instructions, and steady hands. The kind of shift that drained her muscles but left her mind humming. Her scarf, a deep burgundy one her grandmother had knit years ago, was looped loosely around her neck. She tugged it tighter as she pulled onto the highway, eager for nothing more than hot tea and the comfort of her bed. Then she saw it. Headlights swerving across the lanes. A sleek black sports car spun violently, tires screeching as it smashed into the guardrail with a terrible shriek of twisting metal. The car shuddered, skidding half onto the shoulder, smoke already curling from beneath the hood. Naomi's pulse surged. She yanked her own car to the side and slammed it into park. Her body moved before her mind caught up. Door open, scarf yanked from her neck, sprinting toward the wreckage. "Lord, please let him be alive," she muttered under her breath. The driver's side door was crumpled inward. Through the shattered glass, she could see a man slumped forward, chest rising shallowly, blood staining the seat and dripping from his thigh. The smell of gasoline was sharp, biting at the back of her throat. Naomi braced herself and pulled at the door handle. It wouldn't budge. She gritted her teeth and threw her shoulder into it once, twice, until the frame gave way with a loud crack. "Sir, can you hear me?" she called, reaching inside. The man stirred, groaning. His eyes flickered open, blue, dazed, unfocused. "What?" "Don't talk. I've got you." Hooking her arms beneath his, Naomi heaved, dragging his weight across the seat and out onto the wet pavement. Her lungs burned, muscles screaming, but adrenaline carried her. The moment they were clear, an explosion rocked the night. The car erupted into flames, heat searing her back as the fire consumed the wreck. Naomi shielded the man's head with her arm and pressed him to the ground. "Stay with me," she ordered. She tore the scarf from her hand, folded it tight, and looped it around his bleeding thigh. With practiced precision, she twisted it into a makeshift tourniquet until the flow slowed. The man's breathing hitched. His gaze found hers through the haze of pain and smoke. "You saved me." Naomi tightened the knot and pressed down, steady and unshaken despite the chaos. "You're not out of the woods yet. Just hold on." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Naomi stayed with him, one hand on his shoulder, speaking calmly until the flashing lights arrived. Paramedics swarmed, lifting him onto a stretcher. Naomi gave a quick account. Her clothes were streaked with blood and soot, her hair damp from mist. She watched as they loaded him into the ambulance, the blue lights flashing against his pale face. Then, before anyone could stop her, she turned and walked away. She didn't even give her name. Victor Grant had always thought of himself as untouchable. He had built empires, doubled fortunes, and sat at the head of boardroom tables where the world's wealthiest men deferred to him. He flew private, lived in penthouses with glass walls that overlook cities, and dined in restaurants where a single glass of wine cost more than most people made in a week. And yet, all that power, all that money, none of it had mattered the night his car skidded out of control. Dick awoke to the antiseptic sting of hospital air. His leg was wrapped in thick layers of gauze. An IV line trailed from his arm, and a dull, throbbing ache settled deep into his bones. "Welcome back," a nurse said cheerfully, checking the monitors beside him. "You gave us a scare." Victor's mind was sluggish, fogged by painkillers. "What happened?" "You were in a car accident, but someone pulled you out just before the vehicle went up in flames. If she hadn't, we'd be having a very different conversation right now." "She?" The nurse nodded. "A woman. Witnesses said she flagged down help, used her scarf to stop the bleeding in your leg, saved your life. Victor stared at the ceiling, fragments of memory clawing their way back. Smoke, fire, the sharp tug of pain, and then her face. Dark, steady eyes holding his, her voice firm but calm, a scarf wound tightly around his leg. Hands that didn't tremble, even with the world burning behind them. She stayed with me, he murmured. The nurse adjusted his IV. Whoever she was, she left before anyone could get her name. Victor's jaw clenched. In his world, people went out of their way to be seen, to attach themselves to his wealth and influence. But she had walked away. Quiet, untraceable. In the weeks that followed, as Victor began the slow process of healing, he couldn't let go of that memory. Physical therapy was grueling. He pushed himself harder than the doctors recommended, driven by an unshakable thought. I shouldn't even be alive right now. At night, when pain kept him awake, he would close his eyes and see her again. Her scarf, her strength, the way she had looked at him, not as a billionaire, not as a man who owned half a city skyline, but simply as someone who needed saving. Victor Grant was not a man who left debts unpaid. He had the resources to find nearly anyone, but each attempt to track her failed. No records, no name. Just an anonymous guardian angel who had vanished into the night. And so he carried her with him. Her face blurred with time, but her voice, that calm steadiness, never left him. It haunted him through board meetings, followed him through interviews, and shadowed him in moments of quiet solitude. For the first time in his life, Victor felt powerless, not because of his injuries, but because he had no way to thank the woman who had given him back his life. And somewhere, deep inside, he wondered if fate would ever bring her back to him. 5 years had passed since the night of the fire. Naomi Lewis had long since folded that memory into the quiet corners of her mind, the way nurses often did with stories they couldn't carry every day. She never forgot it. Sometimes, in the middle of a shift, a smell of smoke would come back, or she'd catch sight of a burgundy scarf in a shop window and pause. As she didn't dwell on it, she had patients who needed her, and a life that demanded her full attention. She was 32 now, a charge nurse at St. Mary's. The younger nurses looked up to her, the doctors relied on her, and the patients trusted her in ways that humbled her still. Naomi had a way of speaking to people that soothed even the most anxious souls. She had learned early on that medicine wasn't just about charts and dosages, it was about presence, about reminding people they weren't alone. Her days began before dawn and often ended long after sunset. She kept her apartment simple, a modest one-bedroom filled with books, potted plants and photographs of her family. She had never been one to crave extravagance. Still, there were nights when loneliness settled on her shoulders like a weight. Naomi had dated here and there, but relationships never lasted long. Some men admired her strength but resented her long hours. Others thought of her as little more than a caretaker, expecting her to mother them the way she mothered her patients. None of them truly saw her. And so, she poured herself into her work. On a crisp spring morning, Naomi found herself reviewing charts at her desk when her supervisor appeared. "Naomi," he said, "the hospital is hosting a gala this weekend. It's mandatory for senior staff to attend." Naomi groaned inwardly. "You know I don't do well at those things." "It's part of the job," he reminded her. "The donors keep the lights on. Smile, shake a few hands, then you can escape. Besides," his lips twitched into a grin, "you might even enjoy yourself." Naomi doubted it. The night of the gala arrived faster than she expected. She stood before the mirror in her apartment, smoothing the folds of a dark green dress she had pulled from the back of her closet. It wasn't designer, but it fit her well. She tied her hair into a low twist, added a touch of lip gloss, and told herself it was enough. At the ballroom, chandeliers glittered overhead. Waiters in black and white moved like clockwork, weaving between men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in diamonds. Naomi lingered at the edges, a glass of sparkling water in hand, watching conversations swirl around her like a current she had no interest in entering. It wasn't that she resented the donors, she was grateful, truly, but she couldn't ignore the gulf between their world and hers, their luxury cars and private chefs, her 12-hour shifts, and budget grocery runs. Still, she reminded herself, she was here for the hospital. Naomi's eyes wandered toward the stage as the evening's program began. The MC announced the arrival of a special guest, a philanthropist whose contributions had transformed the hospital's research department. And then she saw him. Victor Grant. Tall, broad-shouldered, every inch the polished billionaire in his dark suit. His presence filled the room effortlessly. But Naomi's breath caught for a different reason. She knew that face. Even dressed in wealth and power, she remembered him pale and broken, pulled from flames, blood seeping between her fingers. Her pulse quickened. Could it really be him? Victor stepped to the podium, smiling easily as he addressed the crowd. His voice was steady, confident, but Naomi noticed a faint limp in his gait, subtle but there, a remnant perhaps of the night that tied them together. She gripped her glass tighter, torn between staying hidden and something else. As he spoke, his gaze drifted across the audience, and then stopped. And her. For a heartbeat, the crowd disappeared. His eyes widened, the practiced confidence faltering as recognition dawned. Naomi's chest tightened. After all these years, fate had finally caught up with her. Victor's speech faded into polite applause, but his attention wasn't on the audience. It was on her. The woman standing at the edge of the ballroom in a green dress, her dark hair swept neatly back, her posture calm but guarded. For a moment, Victor thought his mind was playing tricks on him. He had imagined her face countless times over the years, filling in details memory had blurred. But no, this wasn't imagination. This was her. The woman who had dragged him from fire, who had pressed her scarf to his bleeding leg, who had looked at him not as a billionaire, not as a symbol, but as a man clinging to life. And now, she stood only 20 feet away. Victor descended from the stage with a practiced smile, nodding at donors and shaking hands as if on autopilot. But inside, his pulse thundered. Don't let her disappear again. Naomi tried to melt into the crowd, but it was useless. His gaze followed her, intent and unyielding. She set her glass down, telling herself she'd slip out quietly. She didn't belong in this glittering world, and certainly not under the scrutiny of Victor Grant. But she had barely taken 2 steps when his voice stopped her. "It's you!" Naomi froze. Slowly, she turned. Victor stood before her, closer now, his expression one of disbelief, and something softer, almost reverent. Sorry?" she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You pulled me out of that wreck," he said quietly, as though the words themselves carried weight. 5 years ago. The highway. You saved my life." Naomi's breath caught. "You remember that? How could I forget?" His gaze searched hers. "I've been looking for you ever since." Naomi shook her head, almost laughing from the absurdity. "Looking for me? Why?" "Because I owe you everything," he said simply. The earnestness in his voice unsettled her. She glanced around, conscious of curious eyes lingering on them. The last thing she wanted was to become fodder for gossip. "I didn't do it for thanks." Anyone would have stopped. Victor's eyes darkened, as though the very suggestion offended him. "No, not anyone. People drove past. I know, they told me. You didn't. You risked yourself for me, and then you just vanished." Naomi looked down at her hands. Her instinct was to deflect, to slip away again, but the sincerity in his tone anchored her. When she looked up, she saw not the billion plastered across magazines, but the same man she had held on a rain-slick road, bleeding and afraid. "I'm glad you made it," she said softly. Victor's lips curved into a faint smile, but his eyes were still intense, almost hungry, as though afraid she'd vanish again. "I don't want to waste this chance. Will you let me take you to dinner? Just one evening. Not to repay you, because I want to know you. The woman who gave me back my life. Naomi hesitated. She felt the weight of the glittering room pressing in, the invisible line dividing her world from his. She thought of tabloids, of whistles at the hospital, of the chaos that would follow if anyone saw them together. But she also saw the honesty in his eyes, the quiet plea of a man who had everything, yet had never been able to let her go. And against her better judgment, her lips curved into a small smile. One dinner, she said. That's all. Victor exhaled, the relief in his face unmistakable. He extended his hand. Then it's a start. For the first time in years, Naomi felt her heart shift. Cautious, uncertain, but undeniably drawn toward him. Fate had brought them together once through fire. Now, it had brought them together again, by choice. Victor Grant lived in a world most people only saw in glossy magazines. His name sat on the lists of the world's wealthiest men. His face appeared on the covers of business journals, and his donations carried hospitals, museums, and universities into new eras. People whispered about his fortune, his charm, his influence. But very few knew the truth. Victor Grant was lonely. It wasn't for lack of attention. Since the accident 5 years ago, he had become even more of a public figure. The billion philanthropist, the survivor who had turned his near death into a mission of giving back. His calendar overflowed with galas, luncheons, charity balls, and everywhere he went, beautiful women circled him like moths to flame. They were dazzling. Women in diamond bracelets and silk gowns, heiresses who had never worked a day in their lives, actresses whose smiles lit up red carpets. They leaned close when they spoke to him, touched his arm too often, laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. And Victor played the role expected of him. Polite, charming, never unkind. But beneath the surface, he saw the calculation in their eyes. He saw the flicker of recognition when his name was mentioned, the way their posture shifted when they realized he was the Victor Grant. Some wanted the glamour of being on his arm, others wanted the power, still others wanted access to his money. None of them wanted him. Late at night, when the penthouse windows reflected the city lights back at him, Victor found himself wondering if he would ever be more than a prize to win. He had tried. He had dated women whose beauty turned heads when they entered a room. He had flown them to Paris, taken them on yachts, given them access to every indulgence money could buy. And each time, he had watched as their admiration soured into entitlement, or their affection revealed itself to be nothing more than ambition in disguise. It left him cold. In truth, no one had ever looked at him the way she had. The nurse on the highway, the woman who had seen him not as an empire, but as a man bleeding, broken, and mortal. She hadn't asked his name, hadn't cared about his wealth. She had saved him because she could, and then she had left without waiting for recognition. For 5 years, she was the ghost he carried in his chest, the one memory untouched by greed, by expectation, by the hunger of others. And so, when Victor's eyes had met Naomi's across the gala, recognition had struck him like lightning. This wasn't chance. This was the second chance he had been waiting for. And this time, he vowed, he would not let her slip away. Naomi hadn't expected him to actually call. After the gala, she had walked away half convinced that Victor Grant, the Victor Grant, would forget about her in a matter of days. He lived in a world of flashing cameras and billion-dollar deals. She was a nurse who lived paycheck to paycheck in a modest apartment. Whatever spark had passed between them, surely it would fade under the weight of reality. And yet, the very next evening, her phone lit up with an unknown number. Naomi. His voice was worn, certain. She almost dropped the phone. Victor. You said one dinner, he said. I'm holding you to that. But, if it's all right with you, I'd like to start with a conversation. Just you and me. No gala. No crowd. Naomi hesitated, then smiled despite herself. All right. A conversation. That one call became two. Two became three. Before long, they spoke nearly every night. Sometimes, he called from hotel suites in foreign cities, his voice softened by distance. Other times, she heard the hum of his penthouse elevator behind him, or the muted sounds of staff in the background. Wherever he was, his focus never strayed. Naomi learned that he liked black coffee, but hated the taste of champagne, though he had raised a glass of it 1,000 times for photographs. He told her about the violin lessons he'd abandoned as a boy, about the dog he had loved as a teenager, about the scar on his arm he got falling from a tree, long before wealth and power defined him. In turn, Naomi told him about her childhood in Atlanta, about her mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, about how she had known she wanted to be a nurse since she was 10 years old and had bandaged her little brother's scraped knee. She confessed her exhaustion sometimes, the nights she came home too tired to even cook, the moments when she doubted whether her work made any difference at all. You make more difference in a single day than I have in years, Victor said once, his voice low. Don't flatter me, she replied, though his sincerity warmed her in places she hadn't realized were cold. Their conversations stretched late into the night. Naomi would lie on her couch in pajamas, phone pressed to her ear, listening to the deep timbre of his voice. Sometimes there were pauses, comfortable silences that stretched, where neither of them felt the need to fill the air. And slowly, she began to see him not as Victor Grant, billionaire, but as Victor, the man who sometimes got lonely in rooms full of people, who confessed he worried he'd never be truly known by anyone. When at last he asked again, "Will you let me take you to dinner now?" Naomi found herself saying yes, not because she owed him anything, not because of his persistence, but because she wanted to. He didn't take her to the glittering restaurants the magazines loved to photograph. Instead, Victor picked her up in a simple black sedan. No driver, no entourage, just him. He opened the passenger door with a smile that was almost boyish. "You're driving yourself?" she teased, sliding in. "I thought it might be nice to be normal for once," he said. The restaurant he chose was a quiet, family-owned Italian place tucked into a corner of the city. Red brick walls, soft lighting, the smell of garlic and basil filling the air. No paparazzi, no flashing lights. Just 2 people at a corner table with checkered cloth. "This is your idea of impressing a woman?" Naomi asked, though her smile betrayed her amusement. "This is my idea of being myself," he countered. "No show, no audience, just you and me." The evening unfolded with surprising ease. They shared pasta, laughed at small jokes, argued playfully about music. He liked jazz, she preferred soul. Victor admitted he couldn't cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. Naomi confessed she sometimes cried in the hospital supply closet after losing a patient. By the time dessert arrived, Naomi realized hours had passed without her once feeling the heavy divide between their worlds. For the first time since the night of the accident, she looked at him across the table and saw not a stranger bound to her by fate, but a man she wanted to know even more deeply. As he walked her back to the car, the evening air crisp around him, Victor looked at her with quiet intensity. "Naomi," he said softly, "I don't want this to be just one dinner." Her heart skipped. She wasn't ready to answer, not yet. But she met his gaze, steady and unafraid. "Then don't rush me," she said. And Victor smiled, as though that was all the promise he needed. The days after their first dinner passed in a haze of quiet anticipation. Naomi and Victor spoke often, their nightly calls now filled with lighter chatter, inside jokes, and glimpses of each other's everyday lives. But reality began creeping in, like cold air seeping under a door. It started with the whispers. Naomi had noticed the subtle changes at work first. Nurses nudged each other as she walked by. Doctors offered smiles that lingered too long. Then she found herself mentioned in the hospital newsletter, seen accompanying philanthropist Victor Grant at a quiet dinner. Her heart sank. She had tried so hard to stay out of the public eye. She didn't want to be known, as the nurse dating the billionaire. She was Naomi Lewis, and her life, however modest, was hers alone. The real blow came 2 days later, when a tabloid photo surfaced online. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Victor, holding her hand, outside a restaurant. Comments flooded social media, speculating, judging, and dissecting her every gesture. Naomi felt exposed in a way she hadn't in years. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, with messages from friends warning her about attention she hadn't asked for, about people who would question her motives. When Victor called later that night, she was on the verge of tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice tight. I can't be part of that world. I don't want this, Victor. I don't want to be photographed, talked about, judged for just living my life." Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said softly, "I understand, but I want you to know something, Naomi. I don't care about the cameras, or the magazines, or what anyone thinks. I care about you. Not the publicity, not the headlines, not the gossip. You." Her tears welled up, and she bit her lip to keep her voice steady. "But I'm just a nurse. I don't belong in your world. I don't want complications." Victor's voice carried the calm certainty she had come to trust. "Who says you have to belong? I can walk your world with you, and you can walk mine. We don't have to trade places. We just have to be together, if we choose to." Naomi swallowed, feeling a warmth she hadn't realized she'd been missing. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life that included him. Not the empire, not the fame, but Victor, the man who had spoken to her with honesty, whose vulnerability matched her own. Still, the tension lingered. Their next calls were shorter, tentative, as Naomi tried to process the intrusion of media and societal expectation. Every time she looked at her phone, she braced for a headline, for strangers' opinions invading the small, safe corners of her life. Victor, meanwhile, did what he had always done. He waited. He didn't push, didn't demand, but he reminded her in subtle ways, through texts, little notes, and quiet gestures, that he was there, that she wasn't alone. One evening, after a particularly long and exhausting shift, Naomi walked into her apartment to find a small envelope slipped under her door. Inside, in Victor's handwriting, was a simple message. "No cameras, no crowds, just you and me. When you're ready, I'll be waiting." She held it against her chest, exhaling slowly. Perhaps, she thought, there was a way for their worlds to coexist. Perhaps there was a way to have love without losing herself. And for the first time since the tabloid photos, Naomi smiled. It was a Saturday morning when Naomi realized she hadn't slept in a proper bed in 3 days. The hospital had been unusually busy, patients overflowing, emergencies arriving in waves, and she had barely had a moment to breathe. She dragged herself to her apartment, closed the door behind her, and sank onto the couch. Her phone buzzed. A message from Victor. "I'll pick you up at 10. Wear something comfortable." Naomi frowned. Comfortable? That was hardly descriptive. She opened another message. This one with a photo. A local community center. Children running. Volunteers handing out water bottles and snacks. Victor had arranged for them to volunteer at a charity health clinic for underserved families. No cameras, no glitz, no press releases. Just people in need, and him standing beside her. When he arrived, he was wearing jeans and a simple shirt, a baseball cap cooled low. Gone was the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the press-worthy aura. He looked ordinary, human, real. "You dressed for work," he said with a grin, noting her scrubs and sneakers. "Dressed for sanity," Naomi replied, smirking despite herself. The clinic was a whirlwind. Children tugged at her hands, patients asked for advice, and Naomi guided Victor as he passed out water bottles and helped carry supplies. At first he stumbled, unfamiliar with the rhythms of the space. But he quickly adapted. "You're a natural at this," Naomi said, watching him kneel to adjust a child's bandage. Victor smiled, shrugging, unlearning from the best. "The study of the reach and dating, on most head. I know that most has been leveled for the voicing. Most of the time is the case." He simply gave it. During a brief lull, Naomi leaned against the counter, exhausted but smiling. Victor stood next to her, offering a bottle of water. "I wanted you to see," he said quietly, "that I can walk your world. That I'm not just the man in the magazines, the one everyone wants. And me. And I want you to see all of me." Naomi searched his eyes. There was no pretense, no agenda, just honesty. I see you, Victor, and I like what I see." He reached out and took her hand, their fingers entwining naturally. "Then let's do this together. Step by step. No rush, no headlines." For the first time since their reunion, Naomi felt completely at ease. She realized that love, the kind that lasted, wasn't about grandeur or wealth or the world noticing. It was about two people choosing each other every day, even when the world tried to pull them apart. By the time the clinic wound down, the sun was dipping low, casting a golden glow across the center. Victor helped pack supplies into the back of the van, laughing as a child ran up and hugged him tightly. Naomi watched, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years: hope. As they walked back to his car, she squeezed his hand. "Thank you. For today. For understanding me. For showing me that this can work." Victor smiled softly. "It can. We just have to keep walking together." And for the first time, Naomi believed him. The evening air was warm, carrying the faint scent of spring flowers through the city streets. Naomi adjusted her scarf and glanced around the grand ballroom of St. Mary's annual gala. Unlike the first time she had attended, tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't just an observer. Tonight, she felt like a participant in something meaningful. Victor stood across the room, impeccably dressed, yet his eyes sought only hers. He waved, and she walked toward him. Heart quickened but steady. The NC began speaking, thanking donors and highlighting the hospital's achievements over the past year. Then, unexpectedly, he paused and gestured toward Victor. "Tonight, we honor not only our contributors, but also a story of courage, humanity, and gratitude," the NC said. "Victor Grant has a story to share." Victor took the stage. Naomi felt a flutter of nerves. What was he doing? She scanned the crowd, unsure if she was ready for attention. "I want to share a story," Victor began, voice calm but resolute. "A story about a woman who changed my life." The ballroom fell silent. Victor's gaze found Naomi, steady and unwavering. 5 years ago, I was in a car accident that could have ended my life. And I wouldn't be here tonight if it weren't for a nurse who risked her own safety to save mine. She didn't ask for recognition. She didn't seek reward. She simply acted because she could. Her courage and compassion gave me a second chance." Naomi's cheeks burned, a mix of embarrassment and something deeper: pride, warmth, awe. Victor stepped down from the podium and walked toward her. "Naomi Lewis," he said, voice soft but carrying across the room. "I am asking you, not in front of the world, but in front of everyone who knows the value of kindness. Would you let me continue walking through life with you? Not just as a date, not just tonight, but as a partner, a friend, and someone who cherishes you every day." The room held its collective breath. Naomi's eyes glistened. She felt the weight of the moment, the significance of all they had shared. The phone calls, the dinners, the volunteer work, the laughter and quiet trust. She stepped forward, her hand brushing his. "Yes," she said, voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Yes, I'll walk with you." A wave of applause filled the room, But for Naomi and Victor, the world had fallen away. There was no press, no cameras, no gossip. Only the two of them, connected by courage, choice, and love. Victor smiled, taking her hand fully in his. "Thank you for saving my life. And for letting me be part of yours." Naomi laughed softly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "And thank you for proving that not all worlds are too far apart to meet." They left the gala, hand in hand, stepping into the quiet night together. The city lights reflected their shared warmth, the promise of a future built not on wealth, not on status, but on respect, understanding, and the simple truth that sometimes love finds you in the most unexpected ways. And for the first time in years, both of them felt truly whole. The sun filtered through the large windows of their shared home, painting the walls with soft golden light. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, sipping her morning coffee, the aroma mingling with the faint scent of fresh flowers Victor had left on the counter. Across from her, Victor leaned back in his chair, a newspaper folded beside him. His hand reached across the table, brushing hers gently. They didn't need words. The quiet intimacy between them spoke louder than any headline ever could. Outside, a small garden bloomed, evidence of the life they had built together, one rooted in choice, trust, and shared values, rather than fame or fortune. Children's laughter rang from the backyard, where volunteers from the community clinic they had supported for years had brought families for a weekend event. Naomi smiled as she watched Victor kneel to tie a little girl's shoelace. Even after years, he had never lost his patience, his kindness, or the ease with which he connected with the people around him. "Do you remember the first day we met?" she asked softly, letting her hand rest in his. Victor's blue eyes twinkled, mischief and warmth mingling in their depths. "I'll never forget it," he said. "I almost lost you to the fire that night. I wasn't going to let anything else, anything ordinary or extraordinary, take you from me again." Naomi laughed, shaking her head. "I never thought I'd date a billionaire." "You never did date just a billionaire," he replied, smiling. "You dated me, the man who still gets nervous when you walk into a room." She rolled her eyes playfully, but squeezed his hand. "And yet, here we are. Years later. You, me, a life that neither of us expected, but both of us chose." Victor stood and pulled her into a hug, pressing his lips to her forehead. "And I'd choose you again, every time." Naomi rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the city continued its bustling rhythm, but inside their home, time felt slower, warmer, and entirely their own. They had survived fire and fate, scrutiny and doubt, distance and fear. What remained wasn't wealth, or headlines, or public acclaim. It was the quiet certainty of love, built on courage, trust, and the simple truth that some people were meant to find each other, no matter how long it took. And so, with the morning sun casting its gentle glow, Naomi and Victor stepped forward together, hand in hand, ready for whatever life had next. Because they had each other, and that was enough.